Okay, this is a video for Jake Ounce on YouTube. Needs a little extra help knowing how to time these movements. Now, I believe these movements are early Hubert Herr movements, but it's hard to tell. They don't have any identifying marks on them besides a patent number and made in Germany. The plates are similar to Hubert Herr movements, but they are a count wheel. Anyway, so the way that these work is there's a little lifting lever here. That lever usually rides on the count wheel there through this lever. But there's a little snail, I suppose you could call it, on the inside between the plates, kind of hard to see from this angle, and then the stop pin on the warning wheel engaging with that. So let's get the plates apart and I'll show you what it's like inside. Okay, I got the movement all taken apart. Here we have the main components of the strike side of this movement. We've got our warning wheel with the pin on it. We've got the cam here, which this lever will ride on throughout the strike sequence. Anyway, this wheel goes in here. I don't know if I can get it with the camera showing it. So that goes there. Warning wheel goes here. And this lever with this detente here, this little end of that brass lever is what catches on the warning pin and stops the strike movement. Stops the strike. So this goes here. And I'll try and show you how this is to be timed. Trying with one hand. So the way that it is right now, with this lever having dropped there and the pin being here, like this, wouldn't work, because as soon as this is lifted, the pin goes all the way around and the lever is still in the dropped position. So this is still going to be in the way of the strike. What it needs to be is about halfway. This lever needs to rest about halfway on that cam there. I don't know if I'll be able to show it. About right there or so. So just right as it's about to be lifted, so that when this moves a little bit, it'll start to lift this and get that detente out of the way of the pin. Let me put it all back together, try and show you with the plates. Okay, got the plates back together. Hopefully this is timed right, but we'll find out. So let's see what I can do. One hand. Apply power to the train. We'll open this just a bit. It's going, and it dropped exactly where it needs to be. See if you can see that. So it needs to drop almost in the middle of that flat spot on the snail. God, I don't know how well you can see that. But it needs to be close enough to the edge to where when the clock goes, when it starts to strike, it'll get lifted in time, but also not close enough to where when it falls back down, it won't fall before another rotation of the warning wheel. It needs to be right in between the two, so that when it drops down, that pin will catch it. It's also important, of course, to make sure that your warning is in the proper timing. You might be able to see, but this lever here extends into the plates and kind of rests on the arbor, almost on the pinion of that wheel with the cam on it. You see it jumping up and down. That's your warning, and so that's lifted by the cams on the hour hand, and when it comes around the hour, it lifts up a little bit. You can see it'll release that pin, but also catch it. I don't know if I'll be able to demonstrate that. Let's see. Probably not. But anyway, just make sure that your warning will also work. Just to try and demonstrate what the warning phase looks like. Power on the train. I'll be lifting the lifting lever with my finger here. It'll picking up on that. You can see it just moved a little bit. Now when that drops off, it'll continue and do the whole strike. These movements generally have a really long warning phase. It's usually about 10 or 15 minutes as opposed to 5 minutes of regular clocks. So if you try to set the cuckoo when it's in warning, it won't go because that lever will still be lifted. That's probably one of the reasons why these were outdated when they were, among other things. These have quite a few problems, obviously, with the timing of that and the wear that can happen on those parts. But anyway, that's what your warning's supposed to look like. Now, there are a few things that will prevent this movement from working properly. There will be some wear either on this cam or on this lever here. The wear on the lever will be on this little tooth here that actually rides on the cam. That'll be worn down. It's pretty sharp on this movement, but a good way to notice if that's happening is where your warning pin is falling on the actual detente there on the edge. You can see it's pretty close to the end. So if that's worn down, then the timing won't be right because this will be falling further down than it needs to be. Another thing that can happen is this cam will be worn down. You can kind of see the shiny spot where that lever rides on it, but if this is worn down too much, then it'll cause the same problem. The lever will fall down further than it's supposed to, won't catch the pin. But I think with your movement, it seemed like it was catching right. It just seemed like it was that tiny little timing problem. So just to reiterate, see if I can just demonstrate this outside of the clock. Your lever needs to be let me grab a anvil here so I can put this down flat. There we go. So your lever needs to fall on the snail about right there. It can't be too close to this edge, or else it'll do what your movement is doing. It'll go and fall right back down. Can't be close to this edge either, or else it'll go and fall down here. It needs to be about right in the middle there. Now the fix for those two problems where either the lever or the cam is worn down enough, you would need to pull this off using a stake or any other way you can figure out to pull this off and remake this part while increasing the diameter of this cam. Otherwise, if it's the lever that's worn, you'll need to cut off the end of this lever, make it out of a new piece of brass, and solder it on. I've also seen another fix where instead of cutting the whole end of the lever off, they just cut off this piece and bring it down a little bit further so that it catches the pin. Hopefully you won't have to do that though. That's no fun. Another frustration with these movements is trying to time the cuckoo right so it goes gong, cuckoo instead of cuckoo gong or coo gong coo. But the star wheel, which lifts all the hammers and lifting levers for the cuckoo, is pressed on, and so it doesn't have a set screw. So when this is in between the plates, you can't move it. So it's important that hammer goes first, then the higher pitch coo, which will actually be the bottom one, and then the lower pitch one. So gong, coo, coo. And one thing I found to be effective in trying to time that right is when you're putting the plates back together, you can put the nuts on the top half, so nut there, but not on the bottom half, so you can kind of pry the plates open just a little bit and try and disengage that. You'll have to pull the the bottom pivot out of the pivot hole and try and pull it back and rotate it. It's just a big nightmare. Best thing to try and do is just try to time it before you put it back in the plate, so get this wheel where you want it. But trying to do that while also having the rest of the strike timed, it's just a nightmare. So you'll probably have to finick with that a little bit. A little bit of patience will go a long way. A good way to try and time the Cuckoo properly is to have one of the lifting arms of the star wheel be underneath the hammer, and if it stays like that, then that'll be exactly where you want it to be. But again, trying to put this in there while keeping this all timed is pretty tricky, so I'll give it a go, see how it happens. Okay, finally got it all back together, but as you can see, during the process, the nightmare getting it all back together, the wheels moved and is no longer timed properly. So what I'll do, I'll make sure to try and keep the star wheel right there, right after that last lever has dropped. Cuckoo. Try and keep that right there while I move these wheels back a bit. You can see the pin kind of got in an odd place. It's there. This is here, so it needs to go back just a little bit, possibly around somewhere like that. Try and get the pin. Let's see. So that's about where that second wheel needs to be, warning wheel. Where'd the pin go? Anyway, pin needs to go about right there. So now I'll try and pry the plates open a bit, disengage the wheel so I can turn them while trying to keep the star wheel there, because the star wheel has a longer pivot. It's harder to pull out and adjust while the plates are together, but a bit easier to do with the other wheels. All right, finally got it timed all right. Took forever, took maybe 20 or 30 minutes just to do it. Nothing more frustrating than when you have it all perfectly timed and when you go to put the wheels, put the pivots back in the holes, then the wheel spins instead of just moving. So finally got it anyway. But now we can see gong, cuckoo, stop, just as it is. And that detente is sitting on about the center of that flat part. Hard to see from when the plates are together. Okay, perch is back on, everything's back in, everything's timed properly. Just wanted to point out one last thing before we put the movement back in the case, and that's the springs. There's 3 springs on this particular movement. One, obviously, for the gong. You can see it there, just attached to that post that sticks out through there. Second one, this is important. That little spring steel comes out across the plate and engages that lever, keeps it down pressed, keeps it on the cam as it rides. And then finally the post, or the Cuckoo perch. There's usually a brass spring wrapped around it. It goes just onto the plate wherever it is. Do be careful with the brass ones though. This is a little bit of spring that broke off when I was trying to put it back on. Luckily there was plenty of spring, so I just stretched it out and brought it over, and it's still strong enough to keep bring the door back when it's done cuckooing. But anyway, we'll get this back in the case, get it all back together. Before I put it back in the case, I show you how the count wheel works. So that lever reaches down through the plates into the count wheel. So when it goes, it'll strike the half hour, cuckoo once, and close, and it'll strike, let's see, that'll be 3, so cuckoo, 1, 2, 3, 4, it was 4. Half hour, should strike 5 now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And how it works is, it might not be obvious, This lever is all connected, obviously, to the lever that reaches down into the cam that rides on that cam. So as this is going around, if there's a gap in the space, then that lever is allowed to drop back in and lock the movement. And that detente drops in front of the pin and it stops. But if it's not, if it doesn't have that space, there's the gap on the snail where it should drop down, but this little the leg of the count wheel keeps it from falling back in until it's struck the proper hours. Then it's allowed to drop back in. And the count wheel is driven by the chain wheel. There's a little gear that comes up through here. Okay, got the clock on the wall. You can hear it's very out of beat. It actually just stopped. I think what I did was I put the pendulum leader on opposite the way that I had it before, so my adjustments for the beat are now opposite of what they need to be. Not a bad fix. You just reach in and bend the hanger wire so that it's in beat, but I'll work on that later. We'll see how the chime does. Went into warning. Okay, the door seems a little slow, but o'clock. The door seems a little slow. I kind of weakened the spring when I snapped half of it off, so that is kind of to be expected. I don't really mind unless the door has an issue closing while testing. Then that's when I'll go in and fix that. Otherwise, I won't worry about it. This is my personal clock, so I don't care if it's perfect or anything. Half hour. Should strike 10. Okay, and that should be all. I'll adjust the beat for it and get it all nice and pretty again. The reason I pulled it off the wall in the first place was because it was having a hard time starting the strike. There was an abnormal amount of friction during the beginning when the door opens. Definitely doesn't have any problems now. Honestly, one of the problems might have been that spring. Could have been too strong. The weight has a heck of a time pushing against a strong spring. But anyway, that's all. I hope I didn't confuse you too much. I know I'm not very concise. My mind is kind of all over the place at times. But hopefully I've given you what you need to fix your clock.